He halted just inside the doorway, his fingers still curled around the cold brass handle. The house, which had once felt like an extension of his own bones, now felt alien. The midday sunlight sliced through the same familiar windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But the deep, echoing silence he had expected was abruptly shattered by a soft, hesitant sound from within. It was a small, careful noise, the sound of life, fragile yet undeniably present. 3 agonizing years had passed since he fled this place. 3 years defined by paralyzing grief, forced distance, and memories too sharp to touch. He had returned, steeling himself to reclaim the desolate shell of his remaining life. Instead, he had stumbled upon immediate, shocking proof that life had possessed the audacity to continue without ever seeking his permission. Before this story unfolds further, we invite you to pause for just a moment. If you are someone who holds faith in the power of kindness, who understands the value of a second chance, and who seeks out stories that powerfully remind us of our shared human experience, please tap the like button on this video, share it immediately with someone whose hope may be running thin today, and comment your thoughts below. Subscribe to the channel Kindness Thread. Your faithful support is the foundation that keeps stories of empathy and healing alive. The sturdy, unassuming house stood sentinel at the green lip of a quiet, forgotten valley. It was bordered by rolling fields and the distant, hazy blue of hills that seemed to absorb the clear, uncompromising daylight. This was the sanctuary he had built with his wife, not in haste, but brick by patient brick, dream woven into every rafter, before a cruel illness took her away and a tidal wave of grief washed him clean out of his own life. He had abandoned everything, the furniture remaining exactly where she last touched it, the room sealed tight, time itself frozen in the moment he locked the door. He promised himself, through the fog of his pain, that he would return one day, but the days bled into years before he mustered the desolate courage. Now, standing there, his travel bag slumped at his worn leather boots, he felt a profound, unnerving sensation. The very structure of the house had continued breathing in his absence, its heart beating steadily without him. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the unfamiliar yet comforting scent of faint laundry soap and warm, slow-cooked food. The heavy drapes he had left closed were pulled back. The curtains had been freshly laundered. The sturdy wooden table in the kitchen showed clear indentations from daily use, a place where regular meals were now eaten. And there, near the kitchen doorway, stood a woman. She was clutching a baby close to her chest, her body rigid, tense, yet instinctively protective. Beside her, a small girl, perhaps 6 years old, gripped a well-loved, worn doll, her eyes enormous, wide with a mixture of confusion and sudden primal fear. The woman's face was drawn, pale beneath neat, tightly pulled-back hair. Her clothes were simple, somewhat faded, but meticulously clean. She looked, in every posture and gaze, like someone who had mastered the art of surviving in quiet obscurity. A sudden, sharp rush of anger, hot and visceral, was his first reaction. This was his house, his sacred refuge, the one place where his wife's clear laughter still echoed, faint but persistent, in the hollow chambers of his memory. How dare strangers colonize this space? How could they place their hands on the things he had reverently left untouched for years, things preserved in amber? His chest constricted painfully, and his mind spun through accusations. Betrayal, violation, theft, and the ultimate, compounding loss. But then the woman spoke. Her voice was steady, impossibly calm, almost painfully fragile, and what she said next paralyzed him completely. It wasn't the mere content of the words, but the sheer, crushing weight of reality they carried. She explained, without asking for pity, that she was a widow, her husband taken in a sudden accident nearly a year earlier. With absolutely nowhere left to turn, no family willing or able to offer help, and 2 small, utterly dependent children, she had sought shelter in the only place that offered itself, this abandoned house. After months of sleeping in places where safety was a myth, she stated clearly that she had never intended to steal anything. She had certainly never claimed ownership. She had cleaned every surface, repaired the small defects she could manage, and prayed every single day that the true owner would return so she could finally offer this explanation. Her words did not sound like carefully crafted excuses. They sounded like an honest, raw confession laced with profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The small girl unconsciously tightened her grip on the old doll. The baby shifted softly, entirely oblivious to the thick, suffocating tension hanging in the sunlit room. And in that crucial, frozen moment, the man experienced something utterly unexpected. His anger faltered violently, collided hard with a sudden, overwhelming wave of guilt, and shattered. He looked around again, this time through entirely new eyes. The house was not merely preserved. It was cared for. It hadn't been vandalized or abused. It had been loved back toward wellness. The overgrown garden outside had been rigorously cleared and tended. The broken boundary fence, the one he had deliberately neglected to fix for 3 years, stood perfectly repaired. The whole place looked alive, breathing deeper and stronger than it ever had during the years he spent running from it. The widow quietly recounted her days, how she earned meager money through odd, difficult jobs, how she painstakingly taught her daughter to recognize letters and form words using discarded old newspapers, how she warmed milk for the baby precisely at dawn while the morning light crept through the very same windows that now illuminated the room. She spoke entirely without drama, without a single tear, as if she had been taught the hard lesson that survival demanded steadiness and pragmatic action, not the luxury of emotion. Yet, every measured sentence conveyed an unmistakable, quiet pain. He was suddenly flung back to his own desolate nights of loss, sitting alone in anonymous rented rooms, actively avoiding every memory because they inflicted too much hurt. He remembered the hollow, echoing emptiness of this very house after his wife's death. How every familiar corner seemed to stand as an accuser, reminding him of what he had catastrophically lost. He had run away because the silence here was physically unbearable. And now, standing rooted to the spot, he realized this woman had walked straight toward that crushing silence because she literally had no other option. The days that followed were characterized by awkwardness and careful navigation. He did not demand their immediate departure. Instead, he allowed himself the necessary time to listen, to observe, to slowly begin to understand. In the light of the ensuing days, the house felt profoundly different, filled with the faint, rhythmic sound of children's footsteps echoing through rooms that had been dormant graves. Laughter, soft and hesitant at first, slowly returned to the dwelling. The little girl began greeting him with a shy nod each morning. The baby simply smiled, unaware of the complex emotional geography. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his own suffocating grief began to loosen its constricting grip. He started helping, fixing the roof properly, replacing rotting boards, and cooking meals he hadn't dared to prepare in years. The widow, in return, treated the house with profound, almost religious respect, as if honoring not just the aged walls and floors, but the irreplaceable memories enshrined within them. She never crossed any of the invisible boundaries, never once attempting to claim more than the simple shelter and safety she desperately needed. Challenges certainly remained. He wrestled nightly with a deep, corrosive resentment, haunted by the thought that someone else had been inhabiting the very air of his memories. She struggled constantly with a crippling fear, always mentally prepared to pack up and leave if the word was given, never fully at ease. Yet, each sunrise seemed to soften those hard edges a little more. Day by day, tentative trust began to replace rigid tension. The ultimate turning point arrived one quiet afternoon when he found the little girl seated near an old, framed photograph of his wife. There was no fear in her gaze, only soft, genuine curiosity. She looked up at him and simply stated that the woman in the picture looked kind. That single, innocent sentence broke something fundamental wide open inside him. He finally understood. The house was not betraying his past love. It was actively honoring it by serving as shelter for new, vulnerable life. He made an immediate decision, one that startled even himself. He offered them a place to stay permanently, not as temporary intruders dependent on charity, but as family under the same protective roof. The widow initially tried to refuse, her fierce pride battling overwhelming gratitude, but she eventually accepted, her quiet tears flowing freely. They were not tears of weakness or defeat, but of profound, long-awaited relief. From that pivotal day forward, the house truly reformed itself into a home once more. It was not the same home as before. It was fuller, different, undeniably stronger. Clear daylight poured into the rooms with newfound warmth. Children's voices filled the air with purposeful sound. And for the first time in devastating years, the man felt solidly rooted instead of hopelessly lost. His grief did not magically vanish, but it transformed utterly. It was no longer a crushing weight dragging him down, but rather a somber, constant reminder of how much love was still possible, how much capacity for care could still exist. If this deeply human story has resonated with your heart even minimally, please take another moment now. Like this video, share it with someone who deeply believes in compassion and the resilience of the human spirit, and share your powerful thoughts with us in the comments section. Your engagement means far more to us than you can possibly know. Before we reach the final conclusion, we have a small, special request. Please comment just one single word that perfectly encapsulates how this story made you feel. Your words help us build this community of empathy and kindness. In the end, he did not merely find a widow and 2 children living in his house. He found profound healing where he had only expected to find justified anger. He discovered purpose where he had resigned himself to only finding insurmountable loss. And beneath the clear, indifferent daylight sky, in a home once frozen solid by grief, 3 disparate lives slowly stitched themselves together into one shared, unexpected future, proving decisively that sometimes the greatest, most important returns are not to physical places, but to the long-starved human heart.